Everybody, and welcome to Trans Day of Visibility 2022. This is an interview that's going to be posted onto AADL TV, and we're your hosts. And I think I'll let Jenny start. Feel free.
I'm Jenny Carlson. I've worked at the library for like 6 years. I am trans. I've been out for just like over the amount, like I basically started at AADL at the beginning of my transition. So
nice. And then my name is Rena. I joined AADL in 2020, actually right at the very beginning of the pandemic. I use she, her pronouns or she, they pronouns, and I'm just a desk clerk. And today we are joined by our guest. Could you feel free to introduce yourself, LaVelle?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Rena and Jenny. It's so great to see y'all and get a chance to connect with you again. And I'm excited to talk with y'all today. My name is LaVelle Ridley. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently a PhD candidate in the departments of English and Women's and Gender Studies at the University of Michigan. I've been a grad student here for about 6 years now. I came in late 2016, which is also when I started transitioning. So my doctoral career and transition have kind of paralleled each other in that way, which is kind of cool. So all my time in the Ann Arbor Ipsy area has been informed by those aspects of my life, which is how I know you two lovely folks too. So yeah, really happy to be here.
Yeah. I guess like before we even get into any of the questions, LaVelle and Jenny and I met at, I believe, like a regular meeting called Tea Time that was hosted by Carta Manier, wonderful local trans activist and just a wonderful person in general. And that was like back in 2019, if I remember correctly. 2019,
I think so, yeah. You had just gotten to Crown, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the pandemic really has made it really difficult for us to continue that community space. I know that there is a Discord group that exists, but it is, but like, I mean, the thing that I really enjoyed about it was being able to be able to see people in person. So, yeah, hopefully that comes back sometime soon, whenever it's safe. So why don't we? All right, so I already did the first question, but I want to sort of like dig a little bit deeper about so tell us a little bit about yourself, LaVelle.
All right. I guess I can start with the basics. I am a Pisces sun, Gemini moon.
Incredible. Very good.
That's always Scorpio rising. That's always my go-to first general fact. Like, who are you? It's like, I think that those three things will tell you a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, just to pick up from earlier, I'm originally from Toledo, Ohio, about 45 minutes south of Ann Arbor. So a Midwestern girl through and through. I grew up there pretty much my whole life and was raised in like a single parent household, just me and my mom until I was a teenager. Then I had some younger brothers. Went to a Catholic all-boys high school, which was very fun. Very exciting. I learned a lot and I did a lot and it was a fun time. And then I went to college at the University of Toledo. Still in my hometown, and got my bachelor's degree in English there with a minor in African American Studies. And that's when in college is when I came out as queer to myself and to my family, and really got involved in queer social spaces, LGBT organizing, empowerment groups, HIV, AIDS education programs, just like all of the things I wanted to do, like as like a young queer kid that I couldn't do, because of homophobia and whatnot. So So I was very excited to jump into that world. And honestly, that just continued when I came to Ann Arbor for grad school, realizing I was non-binary and then trans woman. Started medically transitioning during my second year in 2017. And yeah, that's kind of my broad biographical sketch. Just love to keep, and I mean, with the emphasis just being on, I really enjoy, not only our tea time group with Carta and all the other lovely humans, but just being able to getting a chance to build that community that we often don't get other places, either when we're younger or because we're immigrants or people of color or, in the Midwest. So things aren't as, structured as they might be in other places. So that just makes the spaces where we met, feel all the more special and important, especially these days.
Yeah, I mean, I think that while we're sort of like on that topic, I could bounce us over to the question that I have like towards the very end, which is I think that like that the thing that you're mentioning about like community spaces, places where people can spend time around. You mentioned something about the Midwest being a place where this is not really traditionally as much of a space that is as available. Yeah, I mean, feel free to elaborate on that. I'm not super familiar with like communities in the Midwest. As I understand it, though, a lot of activism and a lot of like advocacy is more centered in like like I would have to imagine in more urban centers and out in places like Ann Arbor where this is sort of like a growing process. It might not be necessarily the same. So I mean,
right?
Yeah,
absolutely. No, that's a good point to pick up on because. And I've been thinking about this specifically. I was recently on a podcast that a really rad U of M faculty member, Charlie Brissy, is in charge of called Midwestern Suns New Futures, or New Suns Midwestern Futures. There you go. And we were just recently talking about the Midwest specifically as a context for doing like really radical work, really queer work, other kinds of liberation work. And so the Midwest has been on my mind for a while for that reason. But also just more broadly, I think thinking back on my own experiences and people in the community, both in academia and folks not in academia, but who still live in Ann Arbor and Ypsi, even though there are still resources in the Midwest, like I don't want to paint this mythological picture that we have no resources in the Midwest. Right. It's nothing. And then in New York and California, they have everything. Like I'm not trying to say that, but rather, I think a lot of us, especially right now, thinking about like queer youth, like LGBTQ youth, especially trans youth of color, like there's not a lot of places where we get represented, even in those big spaces, those big kind of urban cities or metro spaces. So it gives all the more reason for us to really need that. And also the ways that the innovative and strategic ways that we go about creating community, I think are just really fascinating. Like, I knew people back home in Toledo who literally went to college to have like queer friends. Like that was the only place they could go to be away from home and have friends who were queer and to have a safe space to figure themselves out. That isn't something that comes automatically to queer and trans people of color, especially in a place like the Midwest. So I'm just always in awe of the different kinds of strategies that folks use to figure out how to cultivate those spaces for themselves. And especially Carta organizing the tea time group for years, in the city is just like an example of that.
Yeah. I mean, I the thing that you had to say about academia was a thing that really sort of caught my attention because, I mean, I feel like I had a very similar experience where like the moment that I actually entered the University of Michigan and was sort of actually around a lot of queer people, it gave me an opportunity to really explore gender in a way that I wasn't able to. And I feel like that opportunity really isn't afforded to a lot of people. And especially like, I mean, I think that like, it is not a secret that the University of Michigan is not particularly diverse in terms of its representation, and the ways that impacts on an intersectional level, like the experience of queer people of color, is really. I think that's a really fascinating thing to point out. And actually, that kind of actually brings me around to asking a little bit about your experiences with that. I mean, like you said earlier, there was a really foundational part of your experience getting into this, and I imagine that it's one of the reasons why you're pursuing your PhD, right?
Yes, I'm very much that nerdy trans girl who's like, I want to figure myself out, and so by doing that, I'm gonna do it on the most intense scale, which is to get a doctorate. So, it's no surprise those things come together, as they often do for a lot of folks from different kinds of backgrounds. But for me, I think my ever evolving and shifting experiences as a Black trans woman in the Midwest I'm always thinking about them through my graduate school experience, whether it's here literally in the city, like in Ann Arbor through the university, or when I travel for conferences or talk to people at other places. Like, I'm always thinking about that particular frame, like that lens through which I'm seeing everything. And overall, my experiences in academia and at the university have been overwhelmingly good and positive. It's been, challenging, both given just the times that we are living in and the kinds of
various scandals that keep coming up.
Oh,
it's yes, I still have no clue how to react to that. We're at a university where literally our president just got fired for doing a thing that people are actively protesting outside his house about. Like, like, where are we? Like, what is this? So I don't know. Yeah, it's very disorienting. And if anything, when I think about the silver lining, or I talk to other people about all the horrible things that have happened here, and like just on different scales, the administration's total disregard for the graduate student union, GEOs, the demands that we made during, I think, 2020, 2021, like in the summer, the way that all went, and then there was a spike in cases. Like, it's wild. It's wild, and it really, for me, on the positive ends of things, it helps reinforce, like, this is why I do the work that I do. This is why I choose to be in community with people who are also abolitionists and community care workers and marginalized and oppressed people of all scales. Because literally all the times that folks from those backgrounds, more likely than not, advocate for what they need and say what's going on, dominant power structures don't want to listen, and then bad things happen. So, it's
I mean, I think that I wanted to sort of talk about actually GEO's experiences with the administration, and just a little bit. I understand that it's not to sort of tie it back to the Trans Day of Visibility. As I understand it, the GEO was very much foundational to gender care being a core function of university healthcare, or an important component that was there, that was advocated for by the union.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I sort of only know the broad strokes, but
right.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. That is absolutely, I think the settings that, the conditions that allow for trans folks on campus, graduate students primarily, to get more affirming recognitions on campus, more accessibility on campus and across campuses, and most importantly, getting coverage for more gender affirming procedures being done. So yeah, and that happened. It's happened before. I think before I got here in 2016, GEO won some coverages for trans folks, but then more recently, I think I want to say in 2018. I think it was 2018. I think it's 2018. The union won even more coverage for gender affirming procedures. And that just goes to show you, I think that's a great example of not only coalition building, working with people from all over the university, all over the city, but also a really good example of solidarity. I think that it really takes people coming from different positions of power and different perspectives to all come together to actualize something that helps everyone in the community. Gender affirming procedures are not just for trans people. It's not something that gets locked into a box like that. It's something that opens access up for everyone to get what they need done, no matter what. Whether it's for health or for literally just cosmetic gender affirming, which has as much value as being medically necessary, because it is. The union at the University of Michigan has consistently been, not always perfect, but always a great example to me about what the value of working in community with other people around a bunch of different issues are, and how we all stand to benefit when we stand together and listen to each other too. So
yeah, I 100% agree with that, and I'm really I think that it really does. It makes me feel better about the university as an institution to be able to have this group of students that are able to so actively advocate for people who are marginalized people like us. And yeah, it's the thing that you mentioned actually about people standing to gain when we work together, which I think is really interesting, because when we're talking about visibility of trans people, that a lot of the open politics, and I'm going to be taking this a little bit outside of the context of Michigan, a little bit outside of the context of the university, just because I think that that's an important thing that's happening this year. Is there's a lot of visibility of trans people, but in a lot of bills that are being passed by states across the nation, and a lot of stuff that's just going through legislation without a whole lot of resistance. And
I saw the numbers were 211 different things are being worked on right now.
Yeah, there's a pretty
across the country. Yeah,
it is a pretty massive repression, and there's a lot of legal action against trans youth from transitioning, from barring access to bathrooms, which has been always a consistent legislative battle that's been taking place. Stuff in regards to conversion therapy and things like that, which are all very as people on have done research on and is proven to be ineffective. It's a lot of visibility, but in a very negative sense. And I wanted to hear your opinions and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very as a lot of folks know and have been talking about, a lot of bullshit is happening, not only in our country but the world. And my first reaction to this is, and again, what kind of what motivates the work that I'm doing and what helps me see that silver lining is, we as in the people who are under attack, trans youth, trans people of color, we actually are very powerful. There's something going on in us because they're scared because this is all happening. So that's always a great place for me to start. There's something about young trans girls wanting to just play soccer that these people don't like. There's something there, and I think that we have to take that seriously. I think the recent legislative actions against LGBTQ plus folks, especially trans youth, is a really strong demonstration of kind of the dominant status quo structures of power really wanting to maintain those similar contours, and not wanting to budge or shift in ways that it hasn't made adjustments for, if that makes sense. As a theorist, a feminist theorist, I'm always thinking about power and violence, and especially carcerality. I'm a prison abolitionist scholar, and my thinking around a lot of the legislation that's happened, without being a legal scholar or someone who's interested in politics in the concrete sense, but more the abstract philosophical, how are we culturally thinking about power and political power and things like that. I think that this is a great example of how representation and visibility are not necessarily in and of themselves good, positive, or like I don't in and of themselves. I think that
Yeah.
I really have a lot of trouble with the phrase people say like any press is good press, and
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt, but no, I
No,
totally agree.
You're great.
Uh,
Exactly. So yeah, I think that it's just a great example of showing us how, this is what's happening is an example of how power is being routed through the political process to continuously oppress already oppressed and marginalized groups,
yeah.
especially groups that are like becoming like gaining a political definition. Like I think more people. I think I saw this from Jules Gill Peterson, who's like a very preeminent trans woman of color scholar in the country, a historian. I want to say somewhere on her social media, she had an interesting conversation about how even though trans youth have always existed, even though trans kids have always been a thing, it's interesting now how trans kids and trans youth are being taken up politically and how that's being shaped as a political category. And I think that that's very fascinating because that relates to what my project is doing around trans women of color as a political category of people. So yeah.
Yeah. The thing that you're mentioning about I think that it's interesting that there is a history of transness and trans repression. That is a thing that is like a known, like documented things that historians have looked into before. I mean, some of the more stark examples that I can think of are,
the German museum, the sex museum or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and I don't think that it's really that much of a statement to sort of think about. I mean, I don't think it's that much of a reach, frankly, to call back to, the Nazi Germany regime and the way that the government went out of its way to specifically demonize and politicize marginalized communities and spaces, and even marginalized art. I mean, I think that like that was a major part of the political and social phenomenon of Nazism was sort of them taking marginalized people, making them extremely visible as a target of hate. And I think that like it wouldn't be that much of a stretch to talk about that in the sense that like a lot of state legislatures are talking about that as well.
Absolutely. And I think we could, and I think that's a great example because there's so many other historical moments that we could categorize under that too. The transatlantic slave trade, the apartheid, genocide of indigenous folks, revoking their sovereignty. All of these moments in history with these particular political ramifications have just shown, if I can be like highfalutin theory, like the unincorporability of those marginalized groups at that moment to then result in their ability to be so vulnerable and be so precarious. Because there are trans people, like transness itself, queerness itself is very incorporable to like white supremacy and racial capitalism. Caitlyn Jenner, for example. But I think that the status quo, dominant structures of power, don't know where trans youth can be incorporated into that project just yet. And so hence the attack.
Yes. I mean, I think that in addition, there is something to be said about like the ways that the dominant powers are thinking about youth and the way that they're thinking about family structures, which I think really pairs into this, right?
Yes.
I think that I mean, I'm not a theorist about any of this, so I mean, I think that I will defer to you about talking.
Well,
about
but you are okay, but also you are, but you are though. We're thinking about it and creating knowledge, and that's theory. So that
sure, yeah. Well, actually, I do want to interrogate that for a moment. That is a very, very interesting thing to say, and about creating knowledge. And I've always considered myself, I've always admired like the qualitative approaches to studying things and the creation of information. And I think that like in a lot of ways, a lot of queer studies really do focus on that aspect of the experience. Yeah, I mean, like, I think that to the average person who's listening to this, I'm curious to know, like, if there's a good way to explain that, like the process of queer people creating knowledge, and I wonder if you have like a better way of breaking that down in a way that would make sense.
Absolutely. Again, a great question. I would say a way that I would break that down is to understand this. So if we think of, and this is very loose. This is not a lecture that I've prepared and could really break it down. This is on the spot.
Should we be taking notes?
I think this whole time you should be taking notes. What?
Well,
but especially now.
We'll have the watchers just like make sure to have a notebook, a pen and paper, just gonna keep, But
honestly, a highlighter as a highlighter too, just in case. But yeah. So if we think of theory as a grappling with the world and trying to figure things out and trying to create knowledge about that from that discovery, then that kind of opens up, I think, the process of knowledge making to a lot more people than just people who are theorists. So, for example, and I try to do this in my scholarly work, in my creative work too, being in community with other trans women of color, either academics or activists or artists or some combination of all that, is the fact that I am working towards a doctorate in this field and I've read this literature does not mean that I know more about anything about being a trans woman of color or what trans women of color want or write about or dream about than you or any other, trans woman of color in the world. And what's important in that admission is that it actually, I think, and maybe it doesn't, but I think that helps me and anyone in my position as a scholar, a theorist writ proper, it helps us to not only keep that ego in check, but it also, I think, makes the process of making knowledge a bit more accessible. Like anyone can make knowledge in theory, and a lot of folks who are working in my fields have been producing articles and whole books just saying that. One of my best friends, Jian Chen, who's a Asian American trans person at the Ohio State University, they're a professor of English and women's and gender studies. They just published a book a couple years ago called Trans Exploits, which is one of the first great books about trans of color studies. And a big part of their argument and of their book is that trans people of color across the world, like transnationally, have mobilized different kinds of technologies, arts, aesthetics, perspectives that radically shift how we understand the intersection of gender, race, empire, class, all that. They talk about Janet Mock. They talk about, in their book, they talk about Genesee Gutierrez, who interrupted President Obama during Pride Month when he was president, I think in 2014 or 15. So yeah, I think there's a way in which knowledge and theory and criticism, like these big, huge words, are not these things that have more value when it's someone like me doing it versus anyone else. So I think it's really important to take what others say as forms of theory, as forms of theorizing, as forms of world making. Keeping it, keeping that activeness present in it. That it's an active process. So
yeah. I want to the one thing that's sort of turning in my head a little bit about that thing that you mentioned is in the process of world making, like what do you think when you are creating knowledge, like is there a way for you to be able to verify that in some way? Like, I think that's something that a lot of people, ask in terms of like, anybody can say that like X, Y equals Z, right? But like, in terms of making that into like something that you can distribute and something that like makes sense to other people, and to me, like the thing that rings out as the response to that is talk to people, right? Build a community, like get connected and see like what really like what resonates with people. But I'm curious to know what your thoughts on that are.
I think verification. I think my visceral first thought was verification is like a colonial construct.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I think that, and not that there is, not to say that there isn't a way by which we verify or certify that something is truthful or accurate or contextualized properly. But when it comes to, I think, the work that I'm doing, like in my dissertation, for example, the epistemological orientation that trans women and femmes of color have to knowledge making and to the worlds that they live in, I think that project isn't, I don't want to say by being offered a loan, that's the verification, but I think that we have to, well, because, just because you say something, but I think that we have to be critical of the scales of value that we hold and that we've been socialized to have, where certain things have certain kinds of value or mean more than something else. For example, I've been in spaces where I've been on panels or have facilitated workshops with activists who have been doing prison abolition work or community organizing around mental health or racial justice or transformative justice. I've been in spaces with those folks who've been doing that for like decades. I've been in I'm not even 30. I'm in my late 20s. I've been in grad school for, a couple of years, and there's questions that will get asked to me, but not the people who've been, organizing on the ground because I have a doctorate or because I've, written this article or whatever. And I just use that as a small example of, I think we have to be critical about who we believe holds what knowledge and what that knowledge and like what the value and the weight of that is. I think that, in a space where we're all coming together over certain topics or certain issues or certain needs in the community, I think it's important to, be as egalitarian and equitable with power and with with things like that. So
yeah, I mean, I think that it's sort of is sort of a poll. It's sort of taking back to in order to best represent the humanity in every single person that is talking, being able to be egalitarian about the way that discourse is run is very important. And I think that's sort
Absolutely.
of and I think that sort of is one of the reasons why so many of the legislations and so many of the things that are happening are so I want to say that I don't want to maybe be hyperbolic about it, but it's sort of it is a complete complete ignorance of and sort of almost they're deliberately avoiding talking to the people that these things are going to affect.
Absolutely. And in an actual attempt, in a direct attempt to change the way that we understand things like child abuse or neglect, to have to report that a parent is doing a thing that's actually quite supportive and healthy and backed up. So here again, verification, something backed up by not as much scholarship as there should be out there, but the little bit that there might be between trans studies, psychological studies, childhood studies. Overwhelmingly, if you listen to your children and help them affirm their gender by doing these things that you have access to as their guardian or parent, then that's overwhelmingly good. It's when we don't do those things that kids kill themselves, hurt themselves, don't develop mental health problems, develop physical health problems. So you're absolutely right. It is a complete and willful ignorance of the kinds of knowledges that have been created, that have been supported, and that have been circulating. A clear attempt to politically redefine what those things look like when there's actual child neglect happening, when actual abuse and neglect is happening and not being accounted for, not being resolved, not being addressed in any substantial way in terms of money. How are we giving millions of dollars to police departments, but not to mental health resources or to community centers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, oh, Jenny, it looked like you had a thing to say.
I was just reading the other day about in Texas that Child Protective Services people working there were actively wanting to put, cases of, parents being affirming of their child's gender on the back burner, like this isn't a threat, let's not worry about this. And then they were told from the top that they needed to focus on it, that they couldn't just set it aside and write it off. They have to focus on it. And it's really a very specific, directed focus, which is unfortunate.
Absolutely. That is very unfortunate. I did not know that. Wow. Honestly, and honestly, I didn't know that, but that's not surprising. That's not surprising, and it really, I think that really reveals the clear intentions that the political actors who are pushing this legislation, kind of where they are. And I'm really convinced that this is a stern attempt to redefine some important categories for us when it comes to youth, when it comes to queer and trans folks, when it comes to how we actually talk about harm, how we actually talk about neglect, and it's such an interesting moment. There's so much to think about here. I feel like every year, this is being a queer and trans studies scholar is fascinating, and in that every year with these fields that have for a couple of decades been around formally, every year there's just more. Anytime I thought oh, is what I'm doing valid? Is there a reason I'm doing this other than just wanting to be in community with other people like me, which is such a horrible desire, But when all these things that have just been consistently happening, during my time in graduate school, or at least thinking more critically about these issues and how they relate to each other and how they're building on each other. There's a particular white supremacist, racial capitalist, agenda that this legislation against LGBT youth is built upon. So,
yeah. I mean, and it's also one of those things where, trans people are a minority. This legislation is going to affect a lot of people for sure, but it seems it is less of a, it seems to be that these legislations are, as you said, more interested in redefining the way that people are seen. And I think that the visibility is the point, right? There's a saying that the cruelty is the point, right? To be able to enforce social structures, you have to be able to, set those boundaries in place and make sure that that whatever things that are outside of the norms of what the establishment is comfortable with ends up becoming, demonized and, all of these things.
Absolutely.
So to sort of almost take a 180 degrees, we're gonna spin it around a little bit. I wanted to hear firstly about your thesis, because I want to know what's cooking in terms of the theory that you're working on. So why don't we start with that actually?
Okay. So I've been working on my dissertation project for about 3 years now, 2.5, 3 years, formal research and writing of it. And my dissertation focuses on life writing and life narratives produced by Black trans people, mostly Black trans women and femmes, from roughly 1984 to up till today. And I'm trying to think through how Black trans women, just in the context of the U.S., but in the context of the U.S. Empire, I want to make sure that I'm thinking about the U.S. in that particular way throughout the project. I'm thinking through how memoirs, prison writing, autobiography, anything that we might categorize under life narratives or life writing by Black trans folks, I want to think about how they're using imagination in those texts, but specifically how they're using imaginative narrative acts in their writing to ultimately reimagine what the category of trans women of color means for them. Throughout feminist studies, queer studies, trans studies, there's this presumed assumption that the trans woman of color is almost an objective equivalent to violence and death. And even though so many folks have use both their activist and intellectual platforms to argue against that, there still isn't any really thorough, really sustained conversation amongst trans women of color or trans people of color themselves talking about how they see themselves in relationship to the political categories that we all have to navigate. So I want to use my dissertation as a Black trans woman to stage a conversation amongst other trans women of color and trans people of color and feminists of color, and really think about how the self-proclaimed narratives that we produce, that people like us produce, can be extremely generative tools for political transformation. So,
yeah, I mean, I really like that. I think that there is, I think, a very common and very like, it's almost like a catchphrase, right? Like like a Black trans woman as a thing in the social discourse, like I think is frequently dropped as like, oh, this is the example of like there's an invocation almost like as though we need to understand like that there is one type of X, right? And that to me, like, I think that like being able to write a dissertation that on some level transforms that narrative to something that's more that is more personable and more really in the hands of trans women of color is like, and trans femmes of color is really important.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a hard project to work on most days, but because I'm still having to deal with the archive of the violence and the harm and the sexual violence. It can be overwhelming sometimes, but just paying attention to what's going on in the world, from the broadest scale back down to just like my little neighborhood in Ipsy. I'm always reminded in both positive and negative ways, like why I'm doing this work and what my motivation to do it is. And I think that's what it is at the heart for me, is being able to talk to people like me, and for us to still in 2022, even though I hate that phrasing, but we're like, what does that look like? A conversation just among trans women of color, talking about their lives, talking about good positive things along with shitty negative things. Like, what does that look like, and what can we learn from that? I've learned a lot from that, and trans women of color have been some of the most important people in my life, whether I knew it or not. And so I really want to use my dissertation, which I'm hoping I'll turn into a book a few years after. I'm really hoping that this book can be kind of like a love letter, like a little manifesto, or like a little tome, just for us. So
yeah, I really like that. I mean, I think that it's and as sort of like a self-contained tome that sort of can be referenced for the future, and for maybe future people to write books about, is that is a like, I think that it's really important that literature like this gets out.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I not only have my dissertation, but I'm also so that's the project that I'm working on by myself, but I'm also editing an anthology with some other trans women of color, called Paradise on the Margins.
Yes.
We've been working on it for about 2 years, and it's been really exciting. And they're similar kind of project, whereas my dissertation is I'm the only it's just my scholarly voice amongst all the texts I'm analyzing and referencing. This anthology is going to literally be a collection of voices with trans women and femmes of color, talking about everything ranging from relationships to sex, to money, to bodies, to legacies and ancestors and spirituality. I'm really excited to also be working on that project, which is getting to creatively feed me, whereas the dissertation is kind of intellectually stimulating. So and I'm very grateful to have just another space where I get to talk to trans women of color about our lives and like what we want to see in the world and what matters most to us. So
I went and I looked at the website that you sent, and I was just like, I was looking through the roster of the people, and I was like, wow, you have a collection, like you have put together, like you are part of a team with a capital T.
We are the EC. the editorial collective.
Amazing.
Me, Lexi Atzit in the Bay Area, Raquel Willis in New York City, Eric Zhang, my bestie at Northwestern, and Nava Mao, who you can see on HBO's Generations. Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah. I
Yeah.
genuinely am like, how did all of this come together?
It was really simple. Lexi Atzit is a beautiful trans Latina Capricorn woman out in the Bay Area, and she, in addition to having a million jobs herself, put out a call like 2.5 years ago, I want to say, just in like online trans spaces, like, hey, I'm thinking about maybe putting together an anthology that's like just about trans women of color. There really isn't anything like that. There's books like This Bridge, Caught My Back, Radical Writings by Women of Color. There's Homegirls, Black Feminist Anthology. But there really isn't anything that's about, there's Captive Genders, which is trans embodiment in the prison industrial complex. Excellent book. But there isn't anything that's specifically, like I was saying earlier, trans women and femmes of color talking about themselves with each other about, like, there's nothing like that. So it was very much Lexi's thought baby, and just reached out to some people to see who'd want to submit a chapter, or who wanted to also be an editor, because the more people you have editing, the bigger you are able to make the volume. And the second I saw that, even though I was having to write my dissertation, I was like, Lexi, this is a great idea. I think this is true. There is little to no writing by trans women of color that's addressed to us, by us, like in that kind of formula. And there should be. There's too many of us who are not only existing, living, and thriving, but who do really incredible, moving, powerful work. We need to have something that's capturing that, because we think that there's value there and it means something. So yeah, it's with a Zoom call, some emails, a Zoom call. She explained what her thoughts for the project were, and she brought me on, and then Nava came on, and then no, Nava was already on. So it was Lexi, Nava, and then me, and then Eric came on, and then we ended up adding Raquel as our fifth and final co-editor. And for 2 years, we've been working on this project. I'm in charge of writing our proposal that we'll send to different presses to try to get the book an agent and get picked up, which will be useful for me when I have to write my own book proposal in a couple of years. So it's been good practice for a lot of different things. And yeah, I just enjoyed working on the project and honing my craft and becoming a better and different kind of writer, and getting to make so many new friends at across U of M or at other schools, or through publishing institutions. Like, it's just been a challenging but a steadily great and worth it project, and I'm just so excited for this book to be in the world.
Yeah. Goodness. I was actually just sort of toying around with the idea of, like, the concept of anthologies as a means of communicating a lot of different perspectives in one go. And earlier in this interview, you talked about wanting to capture both the positive and negative experiences of trans people of color and queers. And I think that, like, the thing about including perspectives is to make sure that, like, you don't have a single, like, experience, right?
Right.
And I think that's like, I guess, like, I wanted to hear what you think about the power of an anthology and the power of having different experiences.
Ooh, that's a good question. Is this my prelims exam?
No, this is just
it's a good question. It's a good question that, like, a literary scholar especially might ask. But also the anthology historically, not to be too much of I know I am a scholar, but, like, the anthology also has been a really powerful vehicle for political and artistic change, especially in the longue durée of, like, the feminist movement. A lot of what got Black feminism in courses, on people's syllabi, circulating in bookstores, was anthologies. Like I mentioned earlier, This Bridge Caught My Back, Homegirls, All the Women Are White and the Men Are Black, but Some of Us Are Brave. Like all these different, The Black Woman anthology by Toni Cade Bambara. Like there's so many collections of essays, poems, all those things that have shaped the conversations that we've been having over time. So I think it makes perfect sense to still consider the anthology a useful vehicle for, like you said, all the different ideas, all the different voices that we're going to showcase in the anthology. We're definitely going to be exploring some affinities, some similarities, some tensions, some disagreements. Like it's all going to be in the collection. And the point too, I think, with an anthology is not to despite any affinities or tensions or disagreements, the singular, the priorities of the book, I think, will still shine through. That trans women and femmes of color have value, that we matter to ourselves, and that we're able to have conversations among ourselves that are productive and generative, even when they are conversations about violence and harm and precarity.
And conversations about tensions. I mean, I think that's this is sort of like my brief personal like experience with this as well. But like, I think that there is like we mentioned again about like how there is a monolithic sort of attitude towards like trans women of color. I think that similarly, I think there's a lot of there's a monolith of specific patterns of the ways that, you know, queer people try to work through tensions. And I think that that's actually a very interesting thing that I've been interested in probing, but I don't really have a developed theory on this. But I think that like the thing that you mentioned about like, it's okay to have conflict because, you know, we're working through it together is a thing that is very, I think that is a thing that is notably like absent in a lot of spaces recently. Like, I don't know how to best describe that. Like, I don't know how you feel about that, but.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, that always, that relates back to a very like transformative justice or like even abolitionist perspective towards how we exist in community. You know, even among the editorial collective, we don't always agree with each other, or, you know, we don't always, it's not always the smoothest, you know, process. But I think when you keep the goal and you keep the vision in mind, and as long as you're always leading with your core values, with working together towards that goal, you can figure it out. So, and for me, that comes from a very abolitionist perspective of honestly recognizing conflict or recognizing harm. Like, it's okay that those things happen; they happen, you know. And trying our best to be accountable, which doesn't always just have to translate to something bad happened or harm or whatever, but rather, I think of accountability as informed by transformative justice folks like Mia Mingus and A.J. Marie Brown. I think of accountability as simply, we have a relationship, so therefore I'm accountable to you, and whatever my core values are at the time, whatever constitutes my integrity, whether that's transparency, respect, whatever, you know, I will lead with that in an attempt to keep our relationship as good and strong as I can. So, which is very vague, but that means, you know, that it's never going to be a fixed monolithic definition in all spaces. So that's usually what I try to lead with. And, you know, again, it's not easy, but it's part of the work. It's something that I keep coming back to both intellectually, but also emotionally and like spiritually, like, you know, being in a community with, you know, all these other writers or all these other thinkers or all these other divas can be a lot, but, you know, we change the things we need to, we be accountable as best we can. And we build and we move forward as we need to. So.
Yeah, the thing that, I mean, it just seems like the catchword of abolition just keeps coming up, and I'm like, you know, the Trans Day of Visibility. I think that like that's a very powerful word to root the themes of what we're talking about here. Whether we're talking about, you know, the ways by which like GEO has been working on giving trans and gender affirming care all the way down to the kinds of legislation that we're seeing, like all the way over to these anthologies. All of it is rooted in abolition. It sounds like that's the word, that's the core word that we're using here.
The word of the day.
Yeah,
as the word of the day. Yes, Jenny. Abolition can always be the word of the day.
Yeah.
I think for me, abolition is a really central priority because it's been the thing that's come up throughout my my academic development, but also my own like rising political consciousness. Has always been different tenets of society that have related to abolition in some way, whether it's the literal like advocating for people to not be in prisons, to not be in cages, to I think abolition is the broader project of actively dismantling, but also imagining and creating the kind of world that we all want to live in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to live in a world with cages or where violence keeps happening because of the cyclical nature of harm or of power. Like, I want to live in a world that addresses that. I don't want to live in a world that tries to use trans youth as political pawns to their detriment. I don't want that. So I don't want a world where young trans girls of color grow up scared and shamed because, they don't see people like them, or because no one around them in their life is validating them, or because they think for whatever reason that something's wrong with them. Like, I don't want to live in that world.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, yeah. And I think that like the I guess like to sort of like close the interview, it is the thing that I think I asked last year, but it to me, it's more like even pressing than now, is sort of like, what is the thing that you'd like to say to people, whether that's something that's about abolition, whether it's about, like if a trans person is tuning into this interview, like what is the thing that you're interested in saying, I guess?
Oh my gosh. This is okay. So since that's what you asked, the trans person listening, and what would I say to them? So I'll say what always is the thing that I've wanted to hear as a young trans kid, and like love hearing now. That's so affirming. Which is just, I see you, and you're wonderful. That's it. I see you, and you're wonderful. I think the visibility politics of everything going on now makes it seem that it would be, the opposite, that trans people are always under attack, or that we never get a break, or that this is always a hurdle that we'll just have to always keep coming up against. But what I want to do, both in my personal life, but also with my academic work, is just to offer a moment to breathe, like literally, and also to just kind of take out visibility and spin it on its head. So yes, I do see you, and I think that you're wonderful, and I'm so happy you're here in the world as you are. So, and fuck every legislator.
Oh, okay.
And Florida and Ohio. So
yeah. Thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful interview, and I've had a wonderful time asking all these questions and hearing just all of this joy. I think is the thing that really makes me really happy about this. So I guess we'll see you around for the next Trans Day of Visibility, and also other possible interviews like this in the future. And actually, I'm really hopeful that that one day one of your books ends up on our shelves. Yeah.
I will. I've been telling everyone in my life to just get ready when these things come out, these books, and I'm gonna be a mess. I'm just gonna always be like, you guys, it's out in the world.
there's a way to submit book recommendations on AADL.org and through our contact us link, and I certainly will file one for your books. So
I'm so happy. This is beautiful. This is amazing.
All right. Thank you so much, Lavelle. And I
Thank you,
think that
Rena
I
and
will
Jenny.
probably cut the interview in about now. This has been the Trans Day Visibility 2022. I hope that everyone has a wonderful day.